This has got to be one of the most talked about topics. Do you buy properties as a residential real estate investor personally and hold them in your own name, or do you use corporations here in Canada? Here's some things to give you ideas on what to do for both sides. Now, listen, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an accountant, but we've been doing this a very long time. We've seen pretty much everything at this point. So I can tell you our opinion on this stuff. Here, when you're doing this personally, here are a few things to think about. You definitely, when you're buying residential rental properties or acting as a residential real estate investor in Canada yourself personally, you're gonna have more banking options. Banks like to close on properties in personal names. They don't necessarily like corporations for residential real estate investing. So that's all types of different properties in the residential category. So like student rentals, duplexes, triplexes, regular rental, condo, whatever you're thinking, banks have more options for you closing personally. The next thing to think about is expenses. When you're closing in a property and own that property personally, many accountants have told us, and again, I'm not an accountant, speak to yours, that you can take the expenses personally against other personal income that you've earned. So if you have a lot of expenses on a property in 1 year and those expenses exceed the income that's generated on that property, some of those expenses may be able to use against your other income and get you a tax refund. So again, check with your accountant, but that's what I've been told many times. The next thing is proper insurance. When you're closing on a property personally and owning residential rental properties or doing any type of investing personally, you need the proper insurance. And that's kind of scary for some people. Some people like using corporations because they feel it gives them a better shield of liability in a corporate structure when they're owning property. But personally, many lawyers I've spoken to have told me as long as you have the right insurance, you're good. So for example, if you're going to buy a rental property and you want good coverage, maybe don't get the default, whatever it is these days, $1 million liability coverage, maybe go to 2 million, maybe go higher. Speak to your lawyer about that and what they would recommend. And if you're getting a student rental property, for example, get proper declared student rental insurance for the property. So that's kind of stuff that you want to think about when you're closing properties personally and owning them personally. If you're using corporations, here's some things to think about. The first is you have less bank options. A lot of the banks in Canada don't want to close in a corporation that you just started up to start buying rental property. So if you have an existing corporation, you might have a few more options. But if you're starting up a corporation just to hold these properties or one rental property that you're buying, generally banks don't like them. So that's something to think about. You want to talk to a good mortgage broker in advance on what banks currently are working with investors to close in a corporate name. So definitely cover that off. And the next thing is you might potentially have a lower tax rate. So in Canada, the small business tax rate on income that is less than 500,000, so net income, less than 500,000 in a corporate structure, the tax rate's not that bad. It used to be 15.5 when we started in this in a serious way, then it went to 15. I think it's down to like 12.5. Again, check with your accountant. But business income in a corporate structure has a pretty preferential tax rate up to a net income of $500,000. Again, check with your accountant. But that's something that could be kind of interesting. And then accountants and people will argue, well, if you flip a property, is that income? Is it capital gains? So that's why you need a good accountant when you're going through this to talk to, and ideally one that has worked with real estate and real estate investors for some time. The next thing in a corporation is that you typically are going to have a bit more privacy. When you're renting out that property, you're not giving out your personal name if someone's renting from you. If you are, when you're owning it on title, you have better liability protection according to some lawyers, that if it's in a corporation, it's kind of protected that way from liability. You're protected personally from any liability. Again, talk to your lawyers about this kind of stuff, but privacy and liability, I would say, are better in a corporate structure. The next thing to think about is you're going to have higher banking costs. So if you go to any of the Canadian banks and you open a business bank account, which is what you're going to need, they just have higher fees. So that's something to think about. And then you're going to have higher legal fees to set up a corporate structure, especially if you're using one corp and then maybe a holding corp that owns the real estate corp. And then if you add other corporations over time, so you definitely are going to have legal fees to set up these corporations. And then you're going to have ongoing business accounting fees every year to do your taxes. That's going to be higher than personally doing your taxes. So those are things to think about. But to me, it's worth it. All of these extra things are worth it if you plan on staying in real estate for some time. Because the estate planning angle of owning properties in a corporate structure is much cleaner, in my opinion. when you're doing your wills and your estate planning and this kind of stuff, if you have properties inside one corp or multiple corporations, it's easier for the lawyers to set up estate planning than if you have a bunch of properties personally or have a bunch of joint ventures with your personal name, joint venturing with someone else, and the other person is using their corporate name. Kind of gets messy. If you can keep everything in a corporate structure, in my opinion, it is cleaner for your estate planning. And I kind of like that. So that would be an advantage for using corporations. So there's a few things to give you an idea of the difference between holding personally and corporation. And I have a bonus one for you as well. The bonus one is, in a hot real estate market, if you're buying properties, the seller of the property may not lean towards accepting your offer if there's multiple offers, if they see a corporate name as the buyer instead of a personal name. So that's a little detail, but it is something we see in the real estate market. If you're using a personal name, likely the seller on residential properties might lean towards you. I mean, price is ultimately going to trump everything probably, but it's just something to consider. If you come in with an offer with a corporate name, it kind of sets a different tone. So not the end of the world by any means, but just something to think about. So hopefully that gives you an idea of using yourself personally to hold the properties in your personal name, or if you're using a corporate structure.